The sound of silence in Buckingham Palace speaks louder than any royal proclamation. Behind closed doors, a battle of epic proportions is unfolding, one that could shatter the monarchy forever. And it's not just a matter of who's right or wrong. It's about survival. In the coming moments, you'll witness the untold story of how the royal family faced its biggest threat from within, and why the future of the crown hangs in the balance. Just moments ago, a chilling emergency announcement echoed through the royal corridors, sending shockwaves through the heart of the monarchy. Princess Anne and Princess Catherine, typically the epitome of composure and grace, stood together, united in a moment of crisis. What had been simmering quietly for months had now erupted into a full-blown royal emergency, one born from a web of deception and misdirection. It was a moment unlike any other, one that saw Anne, with her unwavering authority, and Catherine, visibly shaken yet resolute, addressing the nation. Their message was clear and heavy with consequence. This was no longer about petty family tensions or public feuds. It was a direct assault on the very integrity of the monarchy. The nation was left stunned, reeling from the magnitude of the announcement. Royal integrity, they said, had been undermined, and the consequences of this betrayal were dire, irreversible even. But what was most striking was what was not said. No names were mentioned, but the implications were crystal clear. This crisis was deeply personal, born from internal strife, and undeniably connected to one individual, Meghan Markle. The weight of the allegations was staggering. For months, if not years, the royal family had been misled, fed false information that now, with the benefit of hindsight, appeared deeply misleading. Though the full extent of the deception remained hidden for now, the look in Anne's eyes told a different story. This was no simple misunderstanding. It was a profound betrayal, one that threatened the very fabric of the institution itself. Sources close to the palace later confirmed that the decision to go public with such a weighty statement had not been taken lightly. In fact, it had followed a fierce internal struggle that stretched late into the night. Some aides had advocated for discretion, urging the royals to manage the crisis behind closed doors, away from the eyes of the public. But Anne and Catherine were done with silence. They had realized that their reticence had only allowed the lies to fester, unchecked. It was time for the truth to be brought to light. The royal family could no longer sit idly by as the deception continued to grow. The final straw came in the form of a classified document that Meghan had allegedly shared with her legal team, one that directly contradicted royal records. When Anne and Catherine cross-referenced those claims, the reality became undeniable. The line had been crossed, and there would be no turning back. Even as the palace clung tightly to its silence, refusing to reveal the full scope of the discoveries, the message was clear. What had been shared publicly, cryptic, vague hints, was enough to set the media world ablaze with speculation. The strategy was calculated, deliberate. It was a message not just to the public but to Meghan herself. We are watching, we are documenting, and we are prepared to act. And act they would. The public's response was swift and intense, with social media exploding as royal commentators and pundits began to piece together their own theories. Was it a scandal, a leak, a fabrication, a betrayal? The world had no clear answers yet, but one thing was certain: this was only the beginning. This wasn't just another press statement. It was a carefully orchestrated explosion, a declaration that reverberated through the monarchy's very core, sending shockwaves across the world and leaving a sea of questions in its wake. To truly understand how the royal family had reached this moment of crisis, one must look at the quiet unraveling that had been happening behind closed doors, a gradual erosion of trust and truth that had been quietly festering for weeks. The royal family had always prided itself on maintaining silence in the face of controversy, an impenetrable shield of dignity and discretion. But this time, silence was no longer an option. Anne and Catherine understood that if the monarchy's foundation was built on lies, the repercussions would be catastrophic. This wasn't merely about internal family tensions or public squabbles anymore. It was about the survival of the crown itself. It all began subtly under the radar. While the public remained captivated by lavish ceremonies and well-rehearsed public appearances, Catherine, ever the sharp observer, began to notice small inconsistencies buried deep within the royal records. At first, she dismissed them as nothing more than administrative oversights, an extra signature here, an out-of-place date there. But as she began pulling on the loose threads, she found herself unraveling something far more significant. Cross-referencing royal schedules, private notes, and archival documents, she began to uncover conflicting details directly tied to Meghan's public statements, some of which had already shaped the public's perception of royal events. The deeper Catherine dug, the more it became evident that these were not mere coincidences. Key timelines surrounding royal engagements, personal invitations, and even financial disclosures had been subtly altered to serve Meghan's narrative, reshaping the public's understanding of crucial events. But it wasn't just the internal records that raised alarms. Leaked emails, some posted anonymously on encrypted message boards, hinted at a covert collaboration between Meghan and a select group of advisors operating outside the UK. These communications, though often vague and carefully worded, painted a disturbing portrait of a long-term strategy to manipulate public perception and influence royal affairs from the shadows. Realizing the full scope of this intricate web of deceit, Catherine knew she could no longer handle the matter alone. She turned to the one other royal who shared her unyielding commitment to the duty of the crown, Princess Anne. Anne, known for her steely resolve and unwavering sense of duty, didn't hesitate. Without a moment's pause, she began assembling a confidential timeline, one that was as meticulous as it was damning. Drawing from handwritten notes, calendar logs, and private correspondences, she pieced together the puzzle, uncovering a pattern of deceit that stretched far beyond anything they had anticipated. However, when Anne quietly attempted to alert King Charles and Camilla, her concerns were quickly brushed aside. Charles, ever the diplomat, reportedly dismissed the issue as a regrettable misunderstanding, a minor bump in the royal road. Camilla, always mindful of public perception, advised restraint, suggesting that the family focus on maintaining the royal image rather than risking escalation. This decision, though, would soon prove to be a costly misstep. Without the backing of the palace leadership, Anne and Catherine were left to operate in the shadows, piecing together evidence and strategizing in silence. Each passing week brought with it new inconsistencies, fresh layers of suspicion, and disturbing rumors circulating about Meghan's calculated positioning during key events. Requests for private audiences with foreign dignitaries, public appearances perfectly timed to undercut the monarchy's official messaging, and unauthorized edits to press releases that seemed to align with her personal agenda. As the web of deception grew more intricate, the facade of unity within the royal household began to crack. Behind closed doors, palace staff members found themselves divided. Some remained fiercely loyal to royal protocol, unwilling to entertain the idea of betrayal, while others, either charmed or intimidated by Meghan's influence, chose silence, turning a blind eye to the growing storm. On the surface, the public was fed the polished narrative projected by the palace machine, blissfully unaware of the deepening rift within the family. But Catherine knew that if the monarchy's foundation was built on lies, the damage would be catastrophic. This wasn't just about private family matters anymore. It was about the survival of the crown itself. With each new discovery, each uncovered inconsistency, the pressure to act mounted. Catherine and Anne realized that they could no longer afford to remain passive observers. The lies were no longer whispers in the corridors. They had become a part of royal history, embedded in documents and actions that could not be undone. And as the web of deceit grew clearer, the silence within the royal inner circle began to unravel, revealing a dangerous rift, particularly between William and Charles. Prince William, always composed and measured in his public demeanor, felt the sting of betrayal like never before. Insiders spoke of a prince who, though rarely outwardly furious, was deeply wounded, not only by Meghan's actions but by his own family's hesitation to act. As the weight of the lies became undeniable, William issued a chilling warning to those around him. If this goes public without our response, the monarchy may not recover. The stakes had been raised. The crown was on the brink of collapse, and the family's internal divisions had reached a breaking point. It had been building for weeks. William, ever the patient and thoughtful heir, had initially kept his concerns to himself, giving the palace the benefit of the doubt. But as more discrepancies surfaced and the evidence grew undeniable, his patience began to erode. He demanded a full internal review, not a superficial gesture, but a comprehensive and serious investigation. He insisted on access to private communications, archived royal events, and interviews with palace staff. He wanted answers, not empty reassurances. But instead of support, William met with stiff resistance. Camilla, ever conscious of the monarchy's public image, warned that any formal inquiry would inevitably open a Pandora's box, a can of worms too dangerous to confront. Several senior advisors rallied behind her, urging William to let it go, claiming the situation wasn't worth the backlash. They argued that public memory would soon fade, and that confronting Meghan would only serve to elevate her narrative further. But William wasn't fooled. To him, this wasn't about fueling drama or engaging in petty squabbles. It was about protecting the truth, the legacy of the monarchy, and the survival of the crown itself. The breaking point came during a private meeting at Sandringham, a moment that would define the future of the royal family. In a room thick with royal tension, William laid out the evidence, every document, every inconsistency, and the potential fallout from allowing the situation to fester. Yet to his shock, Charles, ever cautious and reluctant to rock the boat, refused to take decisive action. His fear of scandal, division, and perhaps most of all, the emotional fallout that would follow, kept him paralyzed in indecision. The argument was brief but devastating, with words exchanged that had never been spoken before within those royal walls. And in that moment, William, filled with a mixture of frustration and heartbreak, walked out of the room without so much as a bow, the weight of the family's dysfunction hanging heavily in the air. Catherine, however, remained resolute. While many around her questioned the wisdom of escalating such a volatile situation, she stood firm behind her husband with unwavering clarity. She had already borne the cost of silence, paid it in the form of cruel headlines, whispered rumors, and veiled accusations about her character and her family. But now, she was done. No longer willing to let William carry the burden alone, Catherine had decided that enough was enough. The truth, she knew, could no longer be hidden behind a veil of silence. The time for action had come. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The once united royal household now felt like a pressure cooker. It seemed straining under the weight of the deepening crisis. Advisors, once in sync with royal protocol, now splintered into opposing factions. Some rallied behind William, supporting his call for transparency and a full investigation, driven by the belief that the only way forward was to confront the truth head-on. Others, still loyal to the age-old traditions of royal decorum, pushed for silence, advising the family to weather the storm privately and focus on controlling the narrative through damage control. But the truth was inescapable. This was no longer a matter of public relations or royal optics. This was not a situation that could be massaged or spun into something more palatable for the public eye. It was combustible, volatile, a powder keg waiting for a spark. And the longer the family waited to act, the more dangerous the fallout would be. Each passing moment added fuel to the fire, and no one could deny the gravity of the situation any longer. But it was Anne who, in the midst of this chaos, took the boldest step forward, unwilling to wait for consensus or approval from the others. Anne had watched for months as Meghan's influence quietly seeped deeper into the very fabric of the royal family. She had seen how the Duchess had carefully crafted her own narrative, manipulating the press and royal records to her benefit. Anne knew that Meghan's impact was no accident. It was the result of a long-term strategy, one that bent the monarchy's image to suit personal ambitions. And though Anne had remained largely silent, carefully watching from the sidelines, she had never been more certain of one thing: if left unchecked, this manipulation would undermine everything the monarchy stood for. But Anne wasn't driven by a desire for vengeance or personal power. She was driven by an unwavering sense of duty to the institution she had spent her entire life serving. To her, the monarchy was not a mere family business. It was a sacred trust, a responsibility to the people of the nation and to history itself. When that trust was threatened, Anne knew she could not stand idly by. She had to act. For weeks, Anne had been quietly gathering evidence, meticulously compiling a dossier that left no room for doubt. This wasn't some half-hearted collection of suspicions or rumors. It was a rock-solid case, carefully assembled from the royal archives, from leaked communications, and from the growing pile of inconsistencies that could no longer be explained away. Every forged guest list, every altered itinerary, every discrepancy in royal schedules, everything that Meghan had manipulated to rewrite the royal narrative was laid out before Anne with chilling clarity. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. It was a portrait of systematic deceit, one that had been slowly and methodically infiltrating the royal family's operations. And Anne knew that if they didn't act now, the entire foundation of the monarchy would be at risk. But Anne didn't wait for the royal courtiers to weigh in. She didn't care about the politicking or the slow-moving wheels of royal bureaucracy. She saw the danger, and she was ready to face it head-on. She bypassed the usual channels and walked straight into the heart of the royal palace, King Charles's private study. It was a bold move, one that had never been attempted before in the modern royal family. Anne's relationship with Charles had always been a mixture of respect and duty, but this moment was different. It wasn't about family ties or avoiding confrontation. It was about saving the institution. With calculated precision, Anne laid the dossier before him. There were no pleasantries, no softening the blow. She didn't waste time with explanations or context. She simply laid out the irrefutable facts. The evidence was damning. Meghan had, in essence, rewritten the monarchy's story to serve her own ends, manipulating documents, creating false narratives, and positioning herself as a victim of the very institution she had become a part of. Charles, still cautious by nature, looked down at the papers before him. He took a slow, deliberate breath, weighing the gravity of the moment. The silence in the room was deafening, and yet despite the mountain of evidence before him, Charles hesitated. He was, as ever, concerned with the broader ramifications, the public backlash, the scandal, the division it could cause within the family. His mind raced with the potential fallout. There would be no way to control the narrative once the truth was out. The monarchy's stability could very well hinge on the decision he made in that very moment. Anne, unwavering in her resolve, watched him carefully. She knew that this was no ordinary moment. It wasn't just another internal family dispute. It was a matter of survival. The monarchy was on the brink, and if Charles refused to act, the consequences would be catastrophic. She knew that her duty to the crown outweighed any personal loyalty, any concerns about how the family might feel. The monarchy's future was at stake. With a cold, steely voice, Anne issued the ultimatum. "If you don't act, I will." There was no anger in her words, no malice, just pure, unyielding duty. This was not a threat. This was a promise. Anne had made up her mind, and if Charles failed to do what needed to be done, she would take matters into her own hands. Anne's intervention was a turning point. In that moment, she did not just present evidence. She made a decision that would define her legacy within the royal family. She had been patient, watching from the sidelines, but now the situation had reached a critical juncture. There could be no more waiting, no more hesitation. The lies, the manipulation, the deceit, everything had reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. As Anne turned to leave, the gravity of her words hung in the air. Charles was left with a decision that could change the future of the monarchy forever. Would he choose to preserve the family's public image, or would he take a stand and confront the crisis head-on? Anne had made it clear that she was willing to. go to any lengths to protect the institution she had dedicated her life to. And in that moment, she had drawn a line in the sand. Act now or risk losing everything. Anne's bold move was not one of emotion or personal vendetta. It was an act of pure duty. She knew the stakes, and she was prepared to go to the ends of the earth to protect what she had sworn to defend. Whether Charles took her warning to heart remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. Anne had set the stage for the greatest battle the monarchy had ever faced. Behind the scenes, Catherine stood in quiet solidarity with Anne. While Anne had boldly confronted the heart of the crisis, Catherine, with her usual calm and deliberation, had been working behind closed doors. Together, they became a force the monarchy could no longer afford to ignore. Their resolve was unshakable, and the power of their unity would soon make its presence felt across the royal family. As Anne's intervention sent shockwaves through the palace, Catherine's own battle unfolded in parallel, albeit more quietly at first. For months, she had been carefully and methodically gathering evidence, memos, emails, testimonies, documenting how Meghan had subtly manipulated public perception to her advantage. Meghan had weaponized the very ties that bound the royal family, twisting the image of motherhood and family solidarity to align with her own narrative. Catherine had watched as Meghan crafted a story where she was not just a royal, but a victim of the royal machine, painting herself as someone whose every action had been misunderstood or misrepresented. Catherine, ever the stoic, had remained silent, observing from the sidelines. But the moment came when Catherine could no longer remain passive. It was when Meghan, during a highly sensitive royal appearance, publicly insinuated that Catherine had undermined her, that the carefully built walls around Catherine's patience began to crack. It was a calculated, deliberate move, a veiled accusation that hit too close to home. It was more than just a personal slight. It was an attack on her integrity and the work she had done to protect the monarchy's image. Meghan had taken a private disagreement and turned it into a public spectacle, seeking to discredit Catherine in front of the world. That was the tipping point. Catherine, always composed in public, always the picture of grace and control, finally allowed herself to speak out. This wasn't just a moment of defense. It was a declaration of her own truth. She gathered her trusted team and prepared for what would become one of the most emotional briefings in royal history. Her words, when they came, were measured but full of raw conviction. "I have protected this family," Catherine began, her voice trembling not with fear but with fierce, unwavering resolve. "But I will not allow this to continue." There was no turning back now. Catherine's eyes, usually so steady and composed, burned with a quiet intensity. The years of silence, of taking the weight of public opinion on her shoulders, had come to an end. This wasn't about protecting herself. It was about protecting the integrity of the family she had married into and the institution she had sworn to serve. "I have sacrificed, I have stood by this family through every storm, and I will continue to do so," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "But what is happening now, what has been allowed to happen, is not something I can or will tolerate. I will not allow Meghan's narrative to become the truth of our family. Not anymore." Her words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for so long. Catherine wasn't just responding to Meghan's attacks, she was making a stand. This was her moment of defiance, her refusal to be painted as the villain in a story that was being manipulated behind closed doors. She was done being the quiet one. This wasn't a matter of family loyalty anymore. It was about the survival of the monarchy itself, and Catherine would be damned if she allowed it to crumble under the weight of lies and deceit. The briefing was a turning point, not just for Catherine, but for the royal family as a whole. It was a public declaration of a shift in power, a refusal to allow the monarchy's narrative to be hijacked by anyone, no matter their title or their intentions. For the first time, Catherine had stepped into the light, not just as a dutiful royal, but as a woman who would fight for what she knew was right. And with that, the battle lines were drawn. The monarchy, already on the brink, was about to enter a new chapter, one where Anne and Catherine, side by side, would no longer be silenced. Their voices, once subdued by years of royal expectation, had now become the catalyst for change. The monarchy had been rocked to its core, and there would be no going back. What do you think will happen next in this royal showdown? Is the monarchy's future in jeopardy, or will they pull together in the end? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This story is far from over. If you want to stay updated with every twist and turn of this royal crisis, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and join the conversation. Don't miss the next chapter in this historic battle.